Belarus was the scene of mass protests last August after President Alexander Lukashenko was re-elected for another term after 26 years in power, claiming 80% of the votes. Accusations of electoral fraud brought people into the streets. During the protests, one of Lukashenko's electoral challengers, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, emerged as the face of the opposition. She issued 3 demands from exile in Lithuania, calling for Lukashenko's resignation, an end to police brutality, and the release of all political prisoners, including that of her husband. TRT World speaks to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya about her struggle for the future of her country.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting.
Less than a year ago, you were a full-time mother in Minsk with no political experience. Now you are the leader, the face of Belarus's biggest revolt and uprising in decades, which basically thrust you into the international spotlight overnight. How do you deal with this attention? How do you deal with the pressure, the expectations?
You know, it was rather difficult way, and it is rather difficult way and fight, and I doubt that anybody can be prepared for such challenge in anybody's life. But life put me in such circumstances, and I had to answer this challenge, and I'm learning a lot, learning personally. I studying everything new for myself, but the only thing I know that I am not going to give up, that I'm fighting for a better future for my children, for better future for all the Belarusian people.
Yeah, certainly not an easy situation, one you certainly did not ask for. Does the pressure sometimes get overwhelming?
My everyday life is fight. I can't say that I'm living now usual life. I'm waking up with the thoughts about Belarus, about people who are in prison, who are suffering there, and I'm going to bed with the same thoughts. So this is pressure, my inner pressure I feel every day. But of course, I'm threatened with I don't know, physical revenge or something, but again, if it is my fate, so I recalled to this challenge, and I'm fighting.
And the situation that you find yourself in has, of course, to do with last August presidential election in Belarus, where Alexander Lukashenko claimed victory with 80% of the votes, which all follow with mass protests and nationwide strikes. Many people, 1,000 people, have been detained since August, including, of course, your husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky. What is the situation on the ground in Belarus at this particular moment? Protests have seemed to die down. Is that correct?
It's not correct. It's absolutely not correct, because sometimes people misunderstand the meaning of the word protest. Maybe now, at the moment, we don't see those massive rallies and marches on the streets that we used to see in August and September. But protests themselves have never ended, because in such huge wave of repressions from the side of the regime, people have to look for other ways of protesting to this regime. People in Belarus are so inventive and creative at the moment. Of course, nobody wants to be detained and spend a lot of time in jail, so that's why we have to protest differently, not going out to the streets massively because of a huge number of detainees. And people are using art, music, and all that stuff to show that they are against this regime, that we are not giving up, that we are continuing. And these moments, they are exhausting this regime. Like underground protests irritates regime, and they don't know how to cope with this, because they got used to that people just go out and they detained everybody and it's okay. But now they don't have these leverages how to suppress people. Of course, people are still continuing to go out, not so massively. And so the last day, on the 25th of March, we have Independence Day. And not so many people were on the streets, but the whole world saw how many the special techniques and riot police were working on the streets. It was like a war time situation, you know, no people, but you know, the whole army of policemen.
So the form of resistance may have changed, but the protests, you say, are still ongoing. One thing is for certain, though, that despite the mass protests and strikes, Alexander Lukashenko has managed to cling on to power for the time being anyway, mainly, of course, due to support from the Kremlin, from Moscow. Has anyone reached out from the Kremlin to you since August?
It's a pity, but despite of our many time calls for dialogue with the Kremlin, we didn't have any response, and we didn't have any official meetings with anybody from Kremlin. And we're really sorry that Kremlin supported this regime at the beginning, and they supported Lukashenko financially, and it means that Kremlin supported violence and tortures in our country.
And the logistical and financial support, as you said, of course, is vital to Lukashenko's political survival. Under what circumstances, in your view, would President Vladimir Putin be willing to drop that support?
You know, I'm sure that Kremlin will stop to support Lukashenko. Not even will stop. It's already, Kremlin doesn't show such support to Lukashenko as it was before, because Lukashenko is becoming toxic in the whole world, and Lukashenko can't supply stability in Belarus, and Kremlin sees this, and Lukashenko and his regime is becoming too expensive politically and economically to Kremlin, and I think it can become the point. This value, this price can stop Kremlin from supporting Lukashenko's regime.
So it could become too costly at some point and eventually for Moscow in order for the support to continue. But while Moscow, at least for the time being, still supports Lukashenko, the EU and the US, of course, have refused to recognize Lukashenko as the legitimate president of Belarus and impose sanctions on his inner circles. So far, at least on the surface, with hardly any results. In your view, are tougher measures needed from Europe and the United States?
I have to say that sanctions are very powerful, because even understanding that business or person can be sanctioned by European Union or America, they can prevent people or businesses from supporting regime. And of course, the responsibility for the situation in Belarus, I mean, the responsibility for the victory lies absolutely on Belarusian people. But European Union and other democratic countries have to don't have to interfere into political issue of this revolution, but they have to support values that democracy is based on human rights. They have to stand against violence in our country. And so as it's what's going on in Belarus, this level of violence is our pain, and we are sure that much more can be done from democratic countries to support people on the ground. more sanctions, more support of civil society, more events showing solidarity with Belarusian people. Putin, I don't know, keeping Belarus on agenda in every organization of the world.
The former U.S. President Donald Trump seemed to have little interest in Belarusian affairs, perhaps also not to invigorate or provoke Vladimir Putin. Now, of course, there's a new U.S. administration, one that has set out to make human rights a priority in their foreign policy thinking. What are your expectations from U.S. President Biden?
You know, before presidential election in the USA, everybody held this strong position about situation in Belarus, and we really believe that the USA, as one of the oldest democracies, will continue to support Belarusian people for their fight in their fight for democracy. And the USA already showed they support to Belarusian people, imposing legally they impose sanctions on businesses that are loyal to Lukashenko, and they did this Belarusian Democracy Act supporting Belarusian people, and I'm sure that we will be able to meet with Biden's administration in the future, and at the moment we are in constant contact with Washington, and we are keep in touch with Ambassador in Belarus, Julia Fisher. She isn't allowed to come to Belarus at the moment, but we are always in contact with her.
And you are also, of course, in close contact with many European leaders, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron, both of whom you've met personally. What are they telling you in these meetings?
I saw at these meetings, I saw that they know the situation deeply. They understand why we are fighting. They support our intention to resolve this economical and humanitarian crisis peacefully. They really support the idea that that I personally don't want this power, or no, I'm not striving for presidency, but I want our people to retain this right to choose a new president whom people want. And we always told that we want these new elections, to establish these new elections through peaceful dialogue with the regime, between civil society and the regime. We don't want any victims. We don't want any violence from our side. We want to leave this revolution peacefully from the side of Belarusian people.
Some have argued that the EU may be reluctant to provoke Russia over Belarus. Some are comparing it to the situation in Ukraine a few years back. In your view, is this an accurate, is that a fair comparison?
The situation in the Ukraine had different context, because in our country we have revolution between past and the future, I'd say. This is not a geopolitical revolution. We just want to retain our right to choose president on free and fair elections. And we don't look, to the east or west or somewhere else. We want to change our lives of our children for better. And we want to retain our people right to choose where they want to move in the future. But we, and of course, we don't want to trade with our independence and sovereignty. We want to, this is like fight inside the country,
And the protests, of course, as you said before, are ongoing. Many people are still in jail, of course. There's even reports of torture, of people who have suffered torture. Your husband, of course, is also still in jail. He ran against Lukashenko in the presidential elections. When was the last time you spoke to him?
Last time I saw him was 10 months ago, before he was detained. But I had opportunity to talk to him on phone after Lukashenko's visit to jail, and they allowed my husband to call me for 10 minutes, and I could hear his voice. But we can communicate through the lawyer who visits him twice a week. We can send our messages to each other. But even those relatives who are in Belarus, they don't have opportunity to communicate to people who are in jail personally, only through the lawyer.
And you have recently been even branded a terrorist by the Lukashenko government. Are you sometimes afraid? Do you fear for your safety, for your security?
Of course, I feel fear for my security, for my physical safeness. But this accusation of terrorism is rather strange because it's everybody in Belarus and I'm sure abroad understand the silliness of this accusation. But this how Lukashenko's regime works. They are trying to scare people, to frighten people, to, it's like a leverage for me not to have opportunity to return to Belarus at this moment, maybe to calm me down, to silence me. But I have to say that they can silence me, they can silence, I don't know, my husband or somebody else, but they will not be able to silence the whole Belarusian people. People are not giving up, people are continuing to fight, even if everybody in Belarus don't feel safe, everybody is scared and frightened.
The Lukashenko government, as I just said, has branded you a terrorist. I guess that takes away the option of holding direct talks with him, does it?
I never had intention to talk directly to ex-president of Belarus because we see that he is not ready to give, to step away because of his strive for power. But we're sure that there are people in the regime, and there are a majority of them who want these changes for themselves, who want changes for their children. And I hope that we will find people who will find this courage and answer our calls for peaceful dialogue between civil society and the regime.
I've noticed that you called him the ex-president of Belarus. Many people, of course, associate many hopes with you. You may be a reluctant leader and face of the resistance movement at this particular point, but a very prominent one nonetheless. Do you consider to run in future elections? Do you aspire to be the next president, to succeed Lukashenko?
I really don't have intention to run for presidency, for next presidency. We hope will be in September, October this year. But I will stay with Belarusian people as long as they need me. And I always say it's not necessary to be president of the country to be useful for your nation. And but of course the situation can change. But I have mandate to hold these new elections, and I have to be sure that smooth transition of power will be.
And speaking of the smooth transition in power, how do you envision this going to play out? How is this going to end? How do you think the smooth transition will actually take place and be implemented?
So we have a very simple plan. We need to make regime answer our calls for dialogue, to organize this negotiation with the help of OSCE, for example, on the OSCE platform. We want this dialogue to be absolutely opened, and we want to see at this round table the representatives of our neighboring countries. And after this dialogue, we have to organize new elections. And after new elections, after Belarusian people will choose their new president on free and fair elections, we will build new country. We will have to recover our country from this economic crisis, humanitarian and political crisis, and step by step we will build this country. We will lead this country to be democratic and safe and free.
But realistically speaking, such a scenario could only be realized once Moscow drops its support for Lukashenko, doesn't it?
I can't say so, because this is our inner problem. And now we see that Kremlin is keeping neutrality about the situation. They are not supporting Lukashenko vocally. They are not supporting him evidently. But we are afraid that Kremlin can use weakness of Belarus at the moment. But we always declare that our sovereignty and independence shouldn't be betrayed by, and we call for international society to guarantee that all the agreements maybe between Kremlin and regime should be reconsidered after the dialogue or during the dialogue, and they don't have to be considered as true.
In your view, what should happen to Lukashenko once he cedes power? Do you think he should be let go into exile, or should he face trial in Belarus?
This is the question for discussion during the dialogue. This is up to Belarusian people to decide.
You are in Vilnius right now, but surely in touch with many people back home. What are they telling you? What kind of mood are you getting when you talk to the people back in Minsk and Belarus?
Yeah, it's absolutely vital for me to be in touch with people who are on the ground, because that's why every day I'm talking to different groups of Belarusians, with medics, with students, with teachers, strikers, people from neighborhoods, just to understand their real moods, their real situation, just not to be torn out from the reality. And the only thing that I see is that people are not giving up. People are frightened, but it doesn't decrease their will for changes, doesn't decrease their will for continue this revolution, for continue this fight. And we just changing our opinions, changing our views on the situation, and very often we get the information from people how they are fighting, about new initiatives from people on the ground. And of course, I feel huge support from people, and I want to inspire them as well. And that's why we have to continue this conversation, this internet conversation between me, people who are in exile, with the people who are on the ground.
And I take it you are hopeful, you are optimistic that you and your supporters will prevail in the end.
Our people really have changed, and Belarusian people will win for sure. And the question is how long it will take, and how many victims Belarusian people and international society will allow just to bring Belarusians to this victory. But the changes in Belarusians, in their consciousness, they are crucial. The point of non-return has already passed, and people understand if they don't win we will win, but just in case we will become slaves in our own country, and we can't allow this for the sake of our children and for the sake of those who are suffering in jails right now.
So I clearly take it and hear it that you are, despite the hardship, despite the difficulties, you are and remain optimistic about the future of your country.
For sure, I know that we will gain this victory sooner or later, and it's a challenge not only again for Belarusians but also for European Union and the USA to help Belarusians to win over regime as soon as possible.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.